So creatine can be really beneficial. We typically think about it as being beneficial for strength and power sports because it can give your muscles a little bit of extra energy to just go slightly farther, push a little one more rep or two more reps if you're lifting or things like that. But it has also been shown to be beneficial for endurance athletes too.
Are you running a marathon? Oh, I could never run a marathon.
Sure about that? A marathon that's like 42 kilometers, 26 miles. I don't understand those people.
That used to be me. But not anymore. Welcome to the Marathon Podcast. My name is Christian Warwick. Warwick Runs on Instagram, YouTube. Really happy to have you here. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. If you are a regular listener, welcome back. I did mention Warwick Runs on YouTube. I just posted a new video. It's kind of just me talking, but I'm talking a little bit about why I don't think my running is very impressive compared to a lot of runners out there, and how I think that is very important to kind of just focus on or look at when we are looking at all these runfluencers or people like myself who have flexible work days, flexible jobs, and we're posting a lot of things online. And sometimes I think that we might kind of put more pressure on some people or make other people feel worse about their own running and not being able to get as much time to run. In today's episode, we're having Casey with us, who is a registered dietitian. She is specialized in nutrition for athletes. And I'm so interested in this topic. I feel like this is something that I can get better at. And I know that a lot of athletes, and regardless of their level, are very curious about this and want to learn more. So really, really grateful to Casey for taking the time to come on and share all about how to fuel during a week, before, after trainings, after your runs, how to get a balanced diet, and how to know how much your body actually needs. I thought this was great. And we did not really touch on fueling during races or competitions here. We will have another episode together about this when we get closer to the Boston Marathon. How to fuel for a race, especially the Boston, but will obviously be relevant to any other race. Before we dive into the conversation with Casey, there are a couple of things that I want to touch on as usual. One of them being that there is this genius thing on Apple Podcasts where you can actually leave a comment together with your review. And I want to tell you guys and let you guys know that I'm reading those and I appreciate it. So one of the comments had to do with me asking questions that seemed to be more my own interest rather than the listeners when asking guests about things. And I really don't want it to come off as that. I have been trying to use myself as an example sometimes and ask questions that I feel like, if it's something that I am dealing with, that I think a lot of people will deal with, then I want to ask that question. But it's really nice to get these comments because it makes me more aware of what to do, what not to do. And obviously, it all comes down to you guys being happy and enjoying these episodes. And it doesn't really matter what my thoughts are. So I really appreciate that. Another comment had to do with the intro of some words I used in there that I've taken away. And I appreciate hearing that. I do not want anyone to just get uncomfortable with words that I'm using in that intro. And also, someone requested time frames in the episodes, and that is now added to the last few episodes that I posted, and I'll try to add that going forward as well. So I think that this is a great way for you guys to communicate with me. If you don't want to send me messages, just to comment or make a review on Apple Podcasts. Please make a review on Spotify as well, but then you can only give it stars. And I really like to know why you gave it 5 stars or why you gave it 2 stars, 3 stars, whatever. So that was one thing I wanted to just quickly touch on. My training is going well. I'm still running, still biking, still doing my strength training. Not much more to report on after or since the last episode. And I guess the last thing to say before we dive into the conversation with Casey is to remind you that you can buy the marathon hat on marathonpodcast.com. You can get discounts on Strava and the FlexBeam, the red light therapy unit, by using the links down below. And other than that, I think that, or I hope that you'll enjoy this conversation with Casey and that you'll learn as much as I did. Casey, welcome to the Marathon Podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited. I really just admire kind of what you've been doing and all the content you've been putting out there for runners, and I'm excited to be a part of it. This is great.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited to hear first of all about you and a bit more about your journey to where you are today, but also, like I told you, you're the first registered dietitian that I'm having on, and I have so many questions when it comes to fueling and nutrition, and all of that. So I can't wait for us to dive into that. But before we do, why don't you introduce yourself and let us know who Casey is?
Yeah. So my name's Casey. I am a registered dietitian, like you said. So it's kind of like a nutritionist, but a little bit more, a lot more like specialization, I guess, where we work in like healthcare and a lot of other settings. But I specialize in sports nutrition and sports performance as it pertains to fueling. And I work with all types of athletes, but being a runner now myself and, runners needing a lot of that kind of like fueling support because it is such a demanding sport. I work with mostly runners. I'm located in the northeast of the US. So I'm between Boston and Connecticut a lot, but I actually just moved back to Connecticut after having a baby in June to be closer to family. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. And what made you go into this? Like, did have you always had a passion for nutrition and sports?
Yeah, sports, yes, I was very active in sports growing up and I love following sports. Obviously, if anyone's, familiar with New England sports, I'm very lucky to have grown up with the Patriots and the Celtics and all these great teams, on a pro level, but also in the towns. It's really big here too. Nutrition, no. I guess I would say I first got into nutrition when I was a senior in high school. I realized that I paid no attention to my diet, so I looked up at that point, it was the food pyramid, where, like, at the top, there was, like, sweets, and at the bottom, there was bread, and a lot has changed since then, which we won't get into, but yeah, so I kinda got into it then, but forgot about it. I was actually really interested in becoming a doctor or getting into the medical field in some capacity, so I went to university with the plan to be pre-med and go to med school, but part of the prerequisites was to take a class, like Intro to Nutrition, I think it was. And I think like the first week I was in that class, I was like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea how much nutrition can have an impact on, appearance and performance and all of that, but more importantly, health. And I think I was really excited by the idea that I could help actually prevent certain health conditions and even help manage them through how we eat, rather than, and this is not all doctors do, of course, but like rather than treating something once it becomes a problem. And so I was really just super excited from that point to get involved in the prevention piece and more of the education. And so, yeah, so then I was in college. I switched from pre med to nutrition and dietetics was like my major. And then from there, you kind of have to, it's almost like I think someone in your family or someone is like in residency or med school or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. My
Um,
fiance's sister.
Yes, and so
Yeah.
it's kind of like that. It's not the same, but we get matched to a dietetic internship just
Right.
like medical students get matched to a residency. And so I went to school at UConn in Connecticut for my undergrad and then got matched at Tufts Medical Center in Boston. So
Wow, cool.
I had no choice. That's what brought me to
Hmm.
Boston and did my training there. And from there, you can do a lot of different things. I was really still interested on the hospital side of nutrition, where like we work with really sick people that can't eat. I was doing a lot of like tube feeding or IV nutrition, which is a whole other field compared to sports nutrition, but there's some similarities. And I got into nutrition counseling and more of the sports nutrition side once I transitioned from the hospital to a doctor's office, kind of working with people who'd come in with different health conditions. I had a few athletes come in, mostly young athletes, like high schoolers that just really needed some of the basics for sports nutrition and they had big goals and just seeing the big impact that changing their feeling can have, I was sold. I was like, perfect. I'm marrying two of the things that I care the most about, and this is what I'm going to do.
Awesome. I love that. And I also think that, at least to me, when I talk to people and I hear the passion they have for something, that just like, at least for me, makes me believe them more. It's easier to trust them. And it's very clear that you're passionate about this. And it's interesting what you were saying about, how when you first started learning some things about it before you started studying this. Because I had a conversation with actually one of the elite athletes in Boston this year. She's Norwegian, and she on Sunday during our long run, we were talking about this. We are saying that just like a few years ago, when both of us were athletes, winter sports athletes, we're taught different things, but what we were taught was much more like, yeah, just eat candy after your dinner. Like, don't eat candy. Don't replace that with your dinner. You can have it after if that's what you want, and then add some carbs here, some proteins here, like such basic things. But I feel like now, when having this podcast or reading articles, it's so much more focus on that. And I'm curious, for you who are like so deep into this industry or into that field, how much would you say that it has changed and the focus on nutrition has changed over, say, the last 10 years?
Yeah, the focus on nutrition, like, in the sports and performance world has changed. I think for people who work in sports and performance and, sports nutrition, it's always been a big deal because 'cause they've known since the '60s basically that and how important this was and carbs matter and timing and all of that. But it has been really cool to see the boom in, like, high carb fueling and, like, really just, like, the mainstream aspect of nutrition now, especially in sports. Like, so many I first reached out to you because you talked about fueling a lot with some of the pros that you had on, and it's just so cool to hear people be so open about their how they fuel, what they're doing, but also kind of the struggles that they've had with it, and I think it's just made nutrition such a focus and helped to get potentially more research dollars into figuring out really specific things like you're saying. On the other hand, I think that also nothing has changed over the last 10 years because the reality is, and I think a lot of us can get caught up in like the really cool things, like some supplements that are coming out or really specific timing of nutrients or like the source of your protein or whatever, like the individual amino acids or like glucose versus fructose in your gels, for example, sodium. We can get really tied up in those like super niche, high level things. But at the end of the day, most of us really need to start by focusing on the basics, which is all that stuff that you learned. Like, I feel like with my athletes, I typically have to go back, even if they're high level, like we have to go back to, are you eating 3 meals a day? Are you
Yeah.
filling that in with snacks? Are you having all the food groups at your meals? And like it is kinda surprising sometimes, and yeah, just that people really need to go back to the basics. It's so fun and, like, shiny and exciting to do, like, a supplement that helps to reduce lactate or, an antioxidant thing, and that's so cool, and that, yes, they can be really beneficial, but if you have the basics down,
Hmm.
which most of
Hmm.
us don't, not because life gets in the way. It's not as simple as it sounds.
No, you're right, and that is also why I find this so interesting. And so I would love for us to just dive into it and talk about more about this in specifics. So, uh, if you were to just, before we start talking about what you should do, like, just based on what you've seen, whether that is on social media or observing others or working with athletes, uh, what is it that you see that is like the biggest or the most common mistakes that people make when it comes to nutrition in sports?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of big ones that stand out to me. Number 1 is, this idea that whatever you see on social media can directly apply to you, and this idea that there's like a one size fits all approach. And I think we all get caught up in the age of social media in like, if this study comes out that says that you need 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, oh, that means that I need that too. And like, I need to, at all costs get my protein up. But it's not necessarily that black and white. And so I think like just jumping on the latest trend or trying to apply all the things that you see out there to you without really thinking about your life and what you need and what your goals are is a big one. And the reason why I kind of see that as a mistake is it just gets overwhelming. Like none of us who have like jobs and families and all these other things like have time to be so caught up in the, back and forth that there is about nutrition. So yeah, that's one thing I like to work with people on. And the second is really, I would say like changes in appetite and how difficult it can be to actually know what your nutritional needs are, but also then to meet them is a whole other challenge. And something that I say to most of the athletes that I work with, especially like runners, triathletes, like fueling is a full-time job for you outside of your full-time job and everything else that you have going on. It isn't easy. As much as, like I said, it sounds basic of like eat your 3 meals and whatever, it can feel like work to have to end your long run 30 minutes later, an hour later, make a full meal, sit down and eat that meal, even if you don't feel hungry because your body's still like running on adrenaline. And then 2 hours later, have a snack and then think about dinner. Like it really comes up fast. And I think that's where people can get into that trap of underfueling, even unintentionally, because it feels sometimes for marathoners like we are just constantly eating.
Yeah.
And I think in our society where there's so much focus on less, on shrinking our bodies, on cutting down XYZ nutrient or, food or low calorie, it's really hard to kind of like rationalize that and figure out what you need through all that noise of like you should be doing less.
Yeah. I want to ask you about one of the first things that you touched on here, and that was were talking about how people are talking about this like m- grams of protein per kilo of body weight and all of that. And personally, I've always found it a bit hard to obsess over those numbers and be too concerned with that. And so I've kind of just been like closing my eyes, hoping that I'm getting enough proteins because I'm having chicken with my meals. I'm having 2 or 3 eggs for breakfast. Like that has been my approach. And like you said, people have busy lives, and I think that most of the listeners here, they are not professional athletes who are doing this full time, so they're probably combining it with having a family, having a job, and they don't really have time to spend that much time making sure that the protein is like exactly how much is uh, recommended, whatever. How much should we actually focus on those things, and are there some more casual rules or rules of thumbs that we can apply to our nutrition rather than standing there with the scale all the time?
Yes, I'm actually really, like, anti weighing your food, and, like, in some cases, it can really help. More cases than not, it's just an added stress, and it can lead to kind of a snowball effect of, like, obsessing over every gram, and the reality is our bodies are way smarter than we give them credit for, and I don't think we talk about this enough that, like, if you eat more protein than you need, your body's gonna know what to do with that, and it's not gonna cause major issues. If you eat less protein than you need for a day or a meal, your body is going to be able to adjust. It's more like the really, like, big under or overdoing it that tends to cause issues in the long term. But to answer your question, yeah, there's really 4 kind of, like, pillars that I like to think about that I've just kind of, like, come to over working with so many people that I think most of us should just focus on. None of it involves counting or measuring or weighing what you eat because most of us don't need that level of specificity. But to take more of like a qualitative approach, I like to think about adequacy or like meeting your energy needs, balance, meaning getting the right amount of like carbs, fat, and protein loosely, not counting it, which I'll touch on. Um, Variety is another big one to then make sure once you're meeting your energy needs. I kind of think about it in like a pyramid, not to refer back to the food pyramid, but the base of the pyramid I think about as like meeting your energy needs or calories overall. That's like the most important. None of this stuff up here matters if you're not getting the basis. So getting enough energy, then getting enough macronutrients, carbs versus fat versus protein, micronutrients, and then up top is like timing and supplements and things like that. So um getting the adequacy part, balancing is this next step up. Variety is going to be that micronutrient aspect, which I'll get to. And then flexibility is another one that I think a lot of us are missing, especially as runners, where we're like focused so much on like exact times and we're following a training plan and we're not going to deviate from that no matter what. We need to have that flexibility with not just our training, but also our nutrition and other aspects of life. Um, but to go back, meeting your overall energy needs, I like to think about it in, are you eating 3 meals a day at least? Are you having a snack in between meals? Usually, as a rule of thumb, I say, like, none of us should be going longer than 4 or 5 hours during the day without eating. And so, like, if your breakfast is at 5 because you have to go out for your long run, which hopefully you are eating breakfast before that, but if your breakfast is at 5 and your lunch isn't at 12, that's way too much time to go in between meals. So having at least 1 snack in there is kind of like the basis of meeting your energy needs. That next step up, that balance piece is more, are you getting all the different food groups at each of your meals as much as you can? I kind of break it down into like protein, carbohydrates, so grains and starches and that kind of stuff. And then color is the next one. So like either fruits or vegetables. Both of them can really apply there, and fat as well is going to be super important. So as you can get a little bit of each of those things, you're going to be getting a decent balance of macronutrients, and everyone's a little bit different with how much they need. Then we go to variety is gonna be big because you need to be having different types of carbs, different types of protein in order to get the full kind of complement of vitamins and minerals and everything that you need. For example, if the only carb that you ever eat is sweet potatoes are great. They've got vitamin A, they've got fiber, they've got a really specific set of nutrients, but you're gonna be missing out on the B vitamins that whole grain bread will give you or
Mm.
quinoa or whatever. And so having like a different form of each of those food groups as much as you can is really gonna be important. And then that final one, flexibility. I think most people listening to this podcast, like you said, have jobs or families or things like that. Your plan is not always gonna go the way that you plan it to. And so
Yeah.
being able to pivot and say, "You know what? I forgot to pack my lunch today," which is, I made it at home. It's super nutritious, it's balanced. I'm gonna need to go get takeout from my office because I have a run after work, and that's just what my body needs, is huge. Not being able to deviate from that plan is something that I think someone should talk to providers about because that is super common, but it's going to get in the way of fueling for performance, but also recovery and health in general.
Wow. I have so many questions after that. One of them, which probably might be, I don't know if it's easy to answer, but it might be a shorter answer. And that is um, when you're saying that, uh, if we continue on that example of like forgetting your lunch at home, and you're hungry, or you're on a road trip, or you're traveling, uh, and you haven't brought anything with you, so you need to get something. And at least for me, sometimes I'm struggling because, oh, I do want to be healthy. And it's hard, like, okay, I'm going to get takeout somewhere. And so if we use the US, since most of the listeners are American, uh, where is the best place to get takeout from during your lunch break or during your road trip if you just have to because you don't have your healthy lunch with you?
Okay, so I have a two-pronged answer to that.
Yeah.
The actual, like, black and white answer to your question, in my opinion, I think all of us might have a different idea of this, but I would just refer back to that balance piece. Can you find a place that you can get some carbs, some protein, maybe add a fruit or a vegetable? I know that's, especially in the US, a little harder to come by in some of these, like, fast casual type of takeout places, but if you can find a place that does that, for example, like, I don't know, Chipotle, you can get
Yeah.
a bowl that has rice, you can add vegetables, you can get the protein, you can have guac or cheese for fat. versus somewhere like McDonald's or Chick-fil-A, it's gonna be a little harder to come by because you're either gonna have to get a salad, which who gets a salad from McDonald's or Chick-fil-A? And or you're gonna have to get just the carbs and the protein, and you're missing out on something. So that's my, like, simple answer. My second answer is sometimes getting the McDonald's is the healthy choice, and that might be a little controversial, that people might be feeling something about that, but I think that we oftentimes forget the importance that food has for our mental well-being, our social relationships, our, rest. And it's huge to have that flexibility and just know I'm gonna go out for ice cream with my teammates after practice or after this meet, and that's okay. Yes, there's sugar in there. Yes, maybe I've already eaten my needs for the day and it's a little bit more than I thought I was gonna have, but the benefit that you get from, like, doing something fun, enjoying food with friends and family, I would argue is an extremely healthy part of everyone's lives, even if the food itself isn't talked about as being, like, a superfood or, like, super healthy.
Yeah, because would you say that uh, if you find yourself somewhere and like you said, you're approaching that 4 to 5 hours without eating, you don't have food with you. The only option that you have is McDonald's. Is it still better, also from a nutrition point of view, not social or mental, whatever? Is it still better to get that burger at McDonald's than to not eat?
I would say yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would. And I would say, there's a lot of nuance to that, right? Like if you're getting a burger from McDonald's and then you're gonna go on a 10-mile run, might not feel amazing.
Hmm.
And so like the foods you normally would eat before then or bring with you for your lunch might be a little bit more tailored to that. But yeah, being able to get some sort of carbohydrates in your body before you're going out on a run or before you have a really tough meeting or a long day at work or something like that, think about how you'll feel afterwards. And now I know, like, maybe a lot of us would eat a McDonald's burger and not feel like our best, most energized selves all the time, especially for those of us who don't eat it that often. But I don't know if you ever experienced this, like, forgetting your lunch or just having a really busy day at work where you're going from one thing to the next. You get done with your workday and you feel absolutely terrible, depleted,
Yeah.
no energy, shaky even a lot of times that happens to me if I go too long without eating, and it can have a domino effect for the rest of your day, for your evening, for the next days, and then if you think about training, if you're going these long periods of time under fueling, you're not gonna get nearly as much out of your training that you would if you just take in some energy and adjust when you need to. So,
Exactly.
yes.
No, I'm happy to hear that. Mostly because I'm sure that a lot of people have the same experience, but especially like for myself, I've kind of avoided that sometimes, and like, oh, but I'm trying to be healthy, and so then I avoid getting food altogether instead of getting something that is unhealthy, and especially on travel days, like if I'm at the airport and there's nothing but McDonald's or something like it. It's really hard sometimes when you've decided to be healthy to still maintain that intake, I guess. And
Yeah,
it makes me happy to hear, not because oh now I have an excuse to eat McDonald's, but more to actually know that sometimes that is actually the healthier choice for like the sustainability of my training week.
100%, and your mental health and all those aspects
Yeah.
too, getting the most out of your life that you can. Always thinking about what you need to avoid and what you can cut down on is not a way to, like, live that full life and get the most out of your training or anything that you're trying to.
Mhm. And then you mentioned previously this part of just like fueling enough during your day, like making sure you have 3 meals and snacks in between.
Yeah,
Um, and sometimes I feel like it can be hard uh, to know when enough is enough or when I need more. And so like you used the example of after a long run. And if you've been out running for 2.5 hours, 3 hours, it might be tempting to, like you said, sometimes you come home and you don't feel like eating at all because your body is tired, your stomach is a bit upset after running for that long. But sometimes you also feel like you're craving everything and it feels like an excuse to just eat whatever. And I'm curious, is there like a way of figuring out somehow how much you can and maybe not can, but should eat after a long run or after harder training days, so that you're not overfueling, but also not underfueling?
Yeah, and I think as is the case with a lot of nutrition questions, the answer is always gonna be it depends, right? Like, after your 2.5 to 3-hour run, you might need something different than somebody else because of the volume you've already had that week or what you have coming up the next day or how far away your race is or just how your body responds. So it really is individualized, but the most basic way that I think about this is how are you feeling? And nutrition isn't something that like, in some cases you can change one thing and the next day or the next couple of days you'll be like, wow, I already feel better. And that's like the super fun part about this job. But in a lot of cases, it's more about the long term. Like, how did you feel over this whole marathon training block? Were you getting to the end of long runs and feeling like you needed to lay on the couch for the whole rest of the day and totally unable to do things? Were you noticing that you were feeling really out of control when it comes to eating? And I think a lot of us have experienced that. You kind of mentioned like it's almost like feels like an excuse to eat everything. And like I would argue you should give yourself permission to do that because most often that's a sign that you're not getting enough to begin with. And so I think really being able, and this is way easier said than done, by the way, like I struggle with this too sometimes, being able to like really hone in on like, how am I feeling? Am I even noticing when I'm hungry? Am I able to stop eating when I feel comfortably full? Or does it feel like after these long runs or certain cases that I'm just like, way overdoing it and totally stuffing myself and then feeling really terrible physically or mentally about that, that might be a sign that we need to look at your adequacy of your fueling like earlier in the day. But anyways, the most basic way I like to think about it is we use these things in sports nutrition called performance plates. Like what used to be the My Plate in the US where it has like a plate and it's, in sections.
Hmm.
We kind of think about that still in performance nutrition where on an easy day where I think of that as like for most of us, I would count that as a rest day because a lot of us think like, oh, my 10-mile run, I did it at an easy pace. That's an easy day. No, definitely not.
No.
But so like on a rest day or a day where maybe you're going on a walk or, just really busy at work or something, I would think about your plate needing to be like that's when you can really load up on like fruits and vegetables and then you have slightly smaller portion of carbs and the protein kind of stays the same. And then as your training intensity or duration increases or both, the amount of your plate that you need to be filled with carbs changes and increases. So, like on a moderate day, which I like to think about anything that's exercise intentionally, but less than an hour, you really need to have at least a third of your plate of carbs. And then you can still have as much fruits and vegetables as you were going to. But if you find that you're struggling with the appetite piece and you're feeling so full when you're increasing the carbs, cut back a little on the fruits and veggies because those are very filling without the energy that we need. And then on a hard day, which most of us, a lot of our days are hard days. If you're going an hour or longer, with any type of workout, you really wanna make sure that about half of your plate is full of carbs, or, like, just as a rule of thumb, I like to think about 2 fist size amounts, like your own fists. That's about the amount of carbs that you wanna eat as a minimum.
That's a
If
great
you're
rule.
eating that way and you're still feeling like, "You know what? I really want to snack all night," we need to look at, like, "Alright, was that enough? Do we need to plan in a snack?" and things like that. Um, so yeah, that's my long-winded
Mhm.
answer
No,
for
but
how to know if you're eating enough. It's hard.
yeah, but I love your answer, and it also makes me think about those of us, because I'm definitely one of them, who have a sweet tooth, right? Like I I love my candy. I love chocolate. Like if we have it in the house, I will eat it. Which is like something that I'm trying to control not in a way where I'm just like, I'm not going to eat it at all, but just to try to, if I have a bowl of candy, I don't have to eat the whole bowl of candy immediately. I don't have to eat the whole Ben and Jerry's immediately, you know? And uh, I'm curious about how do we know the difference between when we are, like you said, craving food in the way where, okay, this is a sign that my body needs more, compared to having that sweet tooth because you just want something because you gotten addicted to the sugary things or the snacks because it's become a part of your night routine in front of the TV, kind of.
Yeah. I think the answer to that is a little more nuanced because it really depends on what your situation is. So, like, I'll ask you a question back. Was there ever a time in your life where you did cut out sugar or sweets or avoided those things as much as you could because you felt like it was bad or you were trying to like follow some rule or achieve something?
Yeah, definitely. Like I remember, especially as a kid, we had this like years where I had like this deal with my dad that I would get. I don't know if it was a bike after a year or $300, whatever. You know, like if I stayed away from candy for a year, and it was not on his initiative. It was because it was. I don't know if this was a trend in the U.S., but in Norway, we it was a trend. So most kids would have done this sometime. Genius strategy from the parents' side, right? Because they're saving more money on not buying candy than that $300 that they're probably spending at the end of the year. But I remember doing it back then, and then obviously, like as a full time athlete, there were definitely times where I just decided, that, okay, now I'm not going to eat candy or sweets at all because I don't feel like it will benefit me.
Mhm. And so most people who describe kind of that feeling around like just wanting to eat a bunch of candy, especially it usually is at the end of the night. And I think a lot of times that's because that's when we're finally trying to relax and like take care of ourselves. And our bodies are going to rebel against restrictions that we put on them. That is just like a known fact. I don't really believe that there's a such thing as a sugar addiction. Yes, sugary foods and drinks cause some reactions in our brain that make us feel happy or satisfied or things like that. But if you make food like sugar a thing that you can have whenever you want it, after maybe an initial period of like, "Ah, I can have sugar. The dietitian told me I can have sugar. I'm gonna have it after every meal or instead of my lunch." That doesn't feel so good after a while, and it will help you to kind of learn like, "All right, what do I actually need or want?" Like, another example would be, like, on vacation. I think a lot of us have had this where you come back from vacation eating all this great food and drinking and all this, and you just want salad. Like, I've had that feeling so
Yeah.
many times where I'm like, "I can't wait to get back to my routine. I just want a big green salad." And that is another way of trusting your body to tell you like, "Look, this all this stuff you've been doing is not what helps us." And so I think it's just important to be able to tune in and hear that when our bodies are telling us that, which is way easier said than done. But, like, I've
Hmm.
never heard of anyone tell me, "You know what? I just can't stop eating salad at the end of the night. On the couch, I'm just stuffing my face with carrots." Like, I've never heard that. I've never experienced that, and I would argue that that's because we don't take salad away from ourselves. We
Um,
eat it, it's
exactly.
something
Yeah.
that we feel obligated to eat.
Hmm.
I don't know if that answers your question, though.
No, it does. I think, or it does and it doesn't, because I think that it's also a little bit like, in some ways you will know, because like if you're being honest with yourself, I guess you know that, okay, I'm actually feeling full right now, and so I'm just binge eating because it's in front of me. And so, like, when asking this question, and I think I'm sure that's the case with a lot of people working with you too, they're asking a question that they kind of know the answer to, and they just need that confirmation that, okay, yeah, I guess I was right thinking that, but I was hoping for a different answer somehow.
Yes, and that's the hard part about all of this too, is it, like, really involves like, there's no prescription of, like, every athlete that comes through the door, I'm just gonna hand them the same meal plan and say, like, "This is how you optimize your performance." I
Hmm.
think when people are really taking the whole person into consideration, like, we need to take that step back and like first learn how to tune into our bodies. It's kind of like with training, right? Like you've been talking about that a lot lately, where like really being able to tune into like, does this effort feel sustainable to me? How is my
Yeah.
body feeling? How do I feel afterwards? It's important to be able to do that within ourselves too, as it pertains to eating. And,
Hmm.
something I talk to a lot of people about is that humans are all born, believe it or not, with this innate ability to eat exactly the amount that they need. Like, I had a baby in June, so he's 7 months now, and, like, it's been so interesting to see he has no outside influences, like, no one telling him, "Don't eat that, don't drink that much, that's too many calories," or sugar or whatever. He is just, like, eating whenever he feels like it, and when he stops, he's done. Even if I think, "You know what? He hasn't had enough today," there is no sense in trying to force it because he knows. He just innately knows, and we're all born with that, and
Yeah.
it stinks that as we get older and kind of have these external influences that we lose that. I remember when I was growing up in the dentist's office, it's weird that I remember this because I was so young, but even before I knew what nutrition was or cared about it at all, there was this sign on the wall that said, like, "Good foods and bad foods." And,
Yeah.
like, on the good side, it was obviously the things we all know, vegetables and whatever, and on the bad side, it was all candy, soda, things like that, and from a dentist perspective, sure, it's not great for your teeth to have that much sugar, but that was such a young age to get this sense of, like, I'm bad if I like to
Yeah.
drink a Coke once in a while or at all,
Hmm.
or I'm good if I eat only vegetables for a meal. And I think as we get older with all these influences, it's so hard. Everyone talks now in the age of GLP-1s about, like, food noise. I don't know if you've heard that term. Um,
No.
just this idea that I don't know how to describe it, but just this idea that, like, you're always thinking about food, you're always trying to go for
Yeah.
the thing that's going to, I don't know, finally satisfy you when it comes to
Hmm.
food, and sifting through that is really hard and kind of like what you're describing. That food noise oftentimes comes from ignoring what our body needs. And
Yeah.
so if we're saying, "I'm never gonna eat sugar because the dentist told me it's bad for me," or my coach told me that if I just cut out sugar, my times are gonna get better, that can work for a little bit, but we're human. We need a variety of food, and there's gonna be times where sugar or candy is gonna be in front of you. And I think it's important, especially as athletes, to be able to listen to that desire of like, "You know what? Some Skittles sound really good right now," having some and then moving on. And I think
Yeah.
the more we can practice that, the easier that's gonna get, where you can, like you say, like, have cookies at home and just be like, "You know what? I just want 1, and then I'm good." But then
Yeah.
sometimes being okay with the fact that maybe you want 6,
Hmm.
and, like, people might be surprised to hear a nutritionist or a dietitian talking this way, that, like, it's okay to listen to how you feel, but that's the only way that we're gonna feel in control of how we're doing, is if we listen to that, like, inner voice.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. I think that's something that a lot of us need to hear. And it also kind of brings me to a question that I've thought about a lot because uh, or actually, first, one thing I wanted to mention when you were talking about this, like you said that we're born knowing what we need. I remember I had a teammate at some point, and this one summer at a training camp, he kept on just eating chips all the time. I would see him with a bag of chips all the time throughout that training camp. And at the beginning of the camp, he told me why. And he said that, there was this story about a man and he was lost on sea. And all of a sudden, he started craving a fish eye. And so he got a fish and he ate the eye of the fish. And then later on, it turned out that there were there was some really important nutrition in that fish eye that he needed and he would have died otherwise. Like, I'm sure there's something to that story of like your body will tell you what you need. He used this as an excuse to eat chips because he felt like his body was telling him that he needed and wanted chips. Um, a- a- and to me, like, I remember the problem was that he was a very good athlete at the time. So in my head, I was like, yeah, that makes sense, and I would love to believe that because I love chips as well. I didn't take his advice at all. But I'm curious before we move on. Do you also think that sounds as ridiculous as it sounds in my ears now that I'm saying it?
Yes, it does, but I will say that I have talked to a lot of people and actually experienced this myself where some of those, like, seemingly odd food cravings or, like, just really, like, being fixated on a certain food can actually be because of what that food's giving us, just like the story. So, like,
Hmm.
I would actually if I was, like, working with that athlete and he was like, "You know what? All I want is chips all day." In my mind, 2 things come up. What's in chips? Carbs and sodium, salt, right?
Yeah,
So, like, are his parents,
awesome.
like, not putting any salt on all that food that he's having at home? And so with all the sweat losses and things, is he needing that from his training, or is he not having enough carbs? Like, I think a lot of people talk about pregnant women having food cravings, and I had this too where I was like I didn't have cravings, but, like, I suddenly really wanted olives for some reason, and I hated olives before, and I do wonder if it's, like, maybe the healthy fat that's in olives or,
Mm,
like, the salt that's in there that my body just needed extra. So yes, I think people can totally use it as an excuse sometimes, and my argument is, like, we shouldn't need an excuse to be able to eat something that we like, and that
no.
will help us to be more even-keeled about it rather than only eating chips all
Mhm.
day.
No, but that's a super cool take on it because I do agree with you that because I believe in the story that he was telling. Like I'm sure the story is made up somehow, but because I don't understand how they would have been able to test after that fisheye has saved him, whatever. But I thought that was good, but like the chips part, I felt like was more of an excuse. But then the take that you had on it in terms of like, oh, there's something in the chips maybe that he might like, other than the fact that he probably also loved chips. So it's it's there's probably a combination there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what I meant to ask you, or like before I got sidetracked here with that, it was um I'm sure that when you're working with athletes, there are some athletes coming to you and they haven't fueled enough for a very long time, so they don't have whether it's like fat or muscles, they don't have enough of it on their body, and then you have some people who might have a little bit too much from a performance perspective. I really like whenever I talk about this, I like to emphasize that sometimes if there's like especially in pro cycling for instance where I know that they're focusing a lot on the on weight,
Uh-huh.
when someone like if someone in a team like the coach or nutritionist of the team tells uh, an athlete that they need to lose some weight if they want to win the Tour de France, like the reason they're saying that is because they know what it takes to win the tour, to climb the mountains, all of that. That is not at all from a perspective of your average Joe, like any of us, like living our normal lives, not performing at the like world class level.
Mhm.
So I want to say that before I'm asking the question, but I'm just like, uh, uh, I'm sure that people are approaching you and they're like, I need to lose some weight. I need to gain some weight. Maybe sometimes they don't know that they need to gain weight or lose weight.
Mhm.
But from the perspective of a runner who's also trying to perform and get better, and like having had people on this podcast, I've learned how important it is to also fuel properly when you're upping your mileage. Uh, how do you approach that part?
You mean like someone who's coming to me and wants to lose weight?
Yeah, or both of them. So like someone, so I guess like with the person who needs to gain some weight, it might be not necessarily easier, but then at least it's like you need to eat more. And then in terms of like upping the mileage, you can kind of work on that at the same time. But I don't know if
Mm.
someone wants to lose weight, if that is then harder because you have to choose, okay, we can't up your mileage while you're losing weight. What is your take on that?
Yeah, so I think most of us who work in performance nutrition would probably agree that it's during a training block for a big race is not the time to start trying to lose weight or be at a calorie deficit in any way. And so I think that's where it gets really tough for people because I mean, the reality is a lot of people get into running because they want to lose weight because that's
Yeah.
just like what we hear. And that's a totally valid reason to run. But combining high level training and I mean high level, not just elite level training, but like, someone who's going from maybe running a couple miles here and there to running even 20 miles a week, that's huge. That's a huge change in the body, a huge stressor on the body, and we need to recover and fuel for that just as adequately as we would for someone who's running 100 miles a week. Um, and so, like, the 2 don't really go together, where we're trying to lose a significant amount of weight and fuel our bodies for performance. Usually what I suggest people do, if weight loss is something that, is reasonable for them and makes sense, and we can get to that in a second, but if that is the case, I usually suggest people urge people really to wait until the off season or wait until they get through if finishing a goal race is a huge goal of theirs, we're not gonna be cutting down on anything, during that time. Most likely, we have to keep everything really adequate. Um, and so, yeah, and there's a lot of issues that can come from that, and I think this is the pitfall a lot of people have, not just runners, but people who are active in general, and I always think about this time of year because this is, like, the time of New Year's resolutions, and everyone's feeling so motivated for the 2026 year ahead, and it's great. What I often see happen is people go, "I'm gonna do this exercise goal, and I'm gonna change my diet."
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of times what that means is they're gonna cut way back on what they're eating, and they're gonna increase their exercise a ton. And that can happen too for marathon runners or runners in general, where it's like, I have this goal race, and I think all of us are really victims of this idea that we need to look a certain way in order to be at our peak physical fitness and to perform our best, right? Because most of the elites all look a certain way. They have a similar body type, they're very lean. That's not how humans are, right? Like, if you just go into any room and, of course, there's a
Hmm.
lot of reasons for differences in body sizes, but a lot of it has to do with the genetic makeup that we have, our lifestyle, so much more than just how much are we eating and how much are we exercising. But I think we've dumbed it way down to think, "All right, if I just cut back on what I eat and increase my exercise, I'm gonna look like an elite person or I'm gonna look thinner or leaner, and that means I'm gonna perform better," and that can lead to a lot of issues.
Yeah, what you're saying there is super interesting. I was listening to a podcast with he's an Olympic champion in rowing, and he's like he's Norwegian, and he's known for his body, like his physique. He just looks so fit. Like to most people, he is the definition of a well trained athlete, right? And
Mhm.
then he was talking about how he didn't have any confidence whatsoever. He would never throw his shirt off on the beach, and he was like, yeah, it's been really hard because people expect me to look a certain way because I'm an athlete, and I'm not the kind of person like I he didn't feel like he looked that fit. And like obviously he's like a big upper body, probably a bit bigger than most rowers. But when he said that, at least for me, I could really resonate with that in terms of I remember seeing a photo of myself at my last marathon. And I was like, I don't know, number 13 in that marathon, like placed well, did well, right? But I still
Wow.
was like, well, my body isn't supposed to look like that if I'm running that fast. There are these weird thoughts, kind of like what you were touching on, where it's like, well, if I'm running a 2:47 marathon, am I not supposed to look like more fit? Are you not supposed to see my shoulder blades more? All these weird things that we have. Like when I'm saying it now, it sounds silly, but those are still the thoughts that I had. And so as a nutritionist, I, I would like my guess is that you almost have to be a therapist in some ways as well, like guiding your athletes in the way of making them understand that, okay, you're coming to me with the goal of running however fast or running a marathon, whatever. And if that is your goal, then this is what it takes. And like getting that kind of like looking like that might not be the way to go for that. So how do you deal with that if someone approaches you and they like want the performance side and want the looks at the same time?
Well, everybody does, right? Like, you're
Yeah.
saying what you're saying is sounding silly, but I think everyone listening to this, myself included, has been in that same boat. Like, I am really proud of some of the races that I've done, through pregnancy or through, other challenges in life, and just, like, getting to the start line, I think is a huge goal that we forget to think about. We're looking at the results and everything, and I've had the same experience, like, I've gotten these pictures from the race, and it's, like, so sad that we look back at this race where we felt so powerful and we felt so fit, and because of what we expect in our heads that we're supposed to look like or what we felt like we looked like is not totally aligned with or at all aligned with what the pictures look like, it's hard. It's really, really hard, and so I don't have all the answers to that, and I think if someone's really struggling with those things, I think it's a great idea to work with a therapist, a sports psychologist, someone who has expertise in the body image side of things, which, like, I've done a lot of training on that, and I feel really comfortable being able to communicate with people in a way that is really positive and can help, but I can't do all of the therapeutic work that some of these really other professionals do, and so I'll usually will, if someone's open to it, refer them to someone just to have a conversation and see, like, where are these expectations coming from? What are some strategies that I can use to, like, those thoughts are gonna be there, unfortunately. There's no way we can just mind over matter and just, like, force them to never come up. But how
Mhm.
do I deal with that when it is? What can I grab onto that was the big positive? And the other side of that too is, like, yes, changing body composition and some changes in weight can be realistic and healthy for people, but in this age where we're seeing images of everybody all the time, everything is so visual, we have really warped views about what the human body can do. Like, I was
Mhm.
born 5'2". I'm not going to look like a Victoria's Secret model no matter how many hours I spend in the gym or how I eat. It's never gonna happen, right? And, like, that's a hard realization to come to, I guess, as someone who's got that, like, perfectionist mindset, which I think many runners do. Um, but it's just a hard place to navigate, and I think the first step is just realizing, like, having these conversations is so important because even if someone feels really confident, we all have bad days where we feel like, "I don't like the way I look in that," or, whatever, like the race
Yeah.
pictures. That's, like, so sad to me to think that it can put such a damper on us, right? And, like, to your point about, "Oh, shouldn't I look this way if I'm running a 2:47 marathon?" No, because you did it. Like, you are
Exactly.
a 2:47 marathoner, you're gonna be a 2:25 marathoner one day, like, your goals are, and, like, it doesn't matter how you look, it matters that you can do it, and you can, you know?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
just harder. Easier said than done, though, I know.
No, but you're right, and I think it is hard, and I'm also curious, like about your experiences when it comes to that difference. If you look away from the like mental perspective of an athlete, him or herself, but uh, I think that, or I hear about a lot of athletes who are the the moment they start focusing more on fueling correctly and enough, they might not lose weight, but they will start running faster, obviously, because they have more energy. And sometimes you might hit a really good workout and then you have a shower and you see yourself in the mirror and it doesn't really align, kind of like what we were just talking about. Uh, but at least for me, I've kind of realized now, and I'm seeing that slowly. I'm also getting fitter, obviously, because like the more I'm training, the more fit I will get. But regardless of that, my watch clearly shows that I'm having progress, I'm improving. And like you said, my goal is to run that 225 marathon. And so as long as there's progress, I'm moving towards that time. Uh,
Mhm.
but for people who are still like kind of like in that, or still dealing with those thoughts that, oh, I need to look a certain way to get to that 225 marathon. So regardless of just like what you identify with, but more like just to get there, and not really having, maybe haven't seen or experienced, or might not want to see that, oh, but I'm still having progress as an athlete. What do you say to them, and how do you, I don't know if this is something that you are dealing with, or if that is more of a therapist's area, but I'm still curious about what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so definitely a big area to talk about with someone who's like more experienced in the mental side of things. But I would say, I mean, we talk about this stuff a lot because not only is nutrition important for performance, but it's also deeply personal. And there's a lot of thoughts and feelings that come up around what food choices we make or how we look or how it affects us, things like that. What I will say is that just fueling more is not going to inherently get in the way of your goals of decreasing body fat and increasing lean mass or potentially even losing weight. Like I've had plenty of athletes who have been really under fueling and experience this like consistent weight gain, most of it being fat and losing muscle. And that's because our bodies are really primed to prevent starvation. We don't really need that adaptation anymore because most of us can get food at the drop of a hat all day long, way more than we would ever need. But we have it nonetheless. And so one of the things that really happens when we're under fueling is the body starts to go into this fight or flight stress mode of I need to slow down so many processes to conserve energy as much as possible. And there's a lot that goes into that. But basically, one outcome of that can be that people who are under fueling just continue to gain weight and they're feeling so frustrated, like, why is this happening? Then they cut more down on what they're eating and then they feel worse and they keep gaining weight. And so a lot of athletes that I've worked with, we've actually worked on fueling more. Fueling for the work required is a phrase that we always use in sports nutrition. And that's kind of what it is. If you're fueling for a marathon, let's get you feeling good in your training. You can get more out of your training. You could potentially increase volume or weight in the gym or whatever. And a lot of times, what that adequate fueling does is it increases our metabolic rate. So, how many calories we're burning, how much food we need to eat, and it can help with that body composition piece. I don't know, you've had your VO2 max tested, I think, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So there's some labs now that will actually measure your resting metabolic rate or how many calories you need at rest. Like if you were just to lay
Hmm.
in bed all day, it'll tell you an estimate of
Hmm.
how much that is. And I've had some athletes get that done and then come see me and we work for a few months on or even years on some things. They're performing really well. Then they go back to get their RMR retested and it's increased by like someone I was just working with was a female cyclist in her 50s who increased her metabolic rate by 30%. And most of
Oh,
the time we think
wow.
as we get older, your metabolic rate just falls and it's something you just have to deal with. But I wonder if a lot of that has to do with underfueling and trying to like
Yeah.
control our weight. That's just backfiring in a lot of ways. So just fueling more and more adequately is not necessarily going to prevent you from meeting those goals. I think we just have to be thoughtful about like your individual situation too.
Hmm. Thank you for this. I think that this is something that's so important and will be very helpful uh, to the listeners as well. And I think that this is something that people might not talk about, but it's still definitely an issue or something people are struggling with. And then there might be a part that people don't talk that much about, or like you talk about it, but then it's more in terms of uh, real struggles, like mental struggles. But then you have just like the part of you need to fuel more to perform better or to reach your goals. And now I'm not asking about this from the perspective of dealing with an eating disorder, because that is a different topic, but more in terms of like if an athlete is coming to you and whether you can see it, or based on your conversations, or just like everything that you guys do when you work together, it becomes obvious or clear that okay, this person needs to fuel more to reach his or her goals, or to be able to up their mileage. What
Mhm.
is the best approach for someone who is like, oh, I'm probably not fueling enough?
Mhm. That's a great question, and I think it kind of goes back in a lot of cases to the consistency with which we eat. So, like, not making taking a look at their full days of like, are you going really long periods without eating during the day? Are you avoiding a food because you heard somewhere that you shouldn't because it'll help your performance or things like that? So I think like frequency with which we're eating, the volume of food at meals is big, but that's all easier to talk about than it is to do in a lot of ways. And so I usually like to pick like one or two things that are relatively small and seem pretty simple and just start with that. And I do tend to get pushback from people, I think, in a lot of cases of like, well, I'm just not hungry. Like, I don't know how you expect me to eat this amount of food or this many times a day when I'm just not hungry. And I learned that I should only eat when I'm hungry. And to them, I'm usually like, "All right, well, why don't we try this out?" Like, I usually treat it as an experiment because that's really what all of this is, right? Like, we know the science of nutrition in some cases. There's a lot more to be discovered, but, like, we know what should work. It's more about how is it gonna work for you, and so you need to test it out in order to know, "I truly can't eat this much," or, "I really don't like this," or, "It's not making me feel better." And so I like to start small, really. Like, I think there's enough stress going on with marathon training and all the other aspects of life that are going on that overhauling your entire diet is never something that we do. Most people are doing a great job. It's just little tweaks that can make a huge difference in their training, but also their race too.
Mhm. And are there then, like those small tweaks that you're talking about, are there either products or food items like and or food that can really just help in that way, like juice or something that can help them with, like you said, if they feel like they're not really hungry, but it still can, they can get it down easily and not really think of it as food. But what can people do? Are there any hacks to solve that or get around it?
Yeah, in a lot of cases, it's just putting in the work, right? And I think, you know, making the time for something that I'd often say to people is like, this might be controversial to a lot of marathoners, but like, if you don't have time to eat, you don't have time to train. Just like you make the time to fit in your run, even if it doesn't make sense for your schedule that day, you also need to commit to making that time to eating early enough before your run. If you're feeling like you're just not hungry or your stomach hurts when you have breakfast and then run out the door, okay, then we need to wake up even earlier to fit that in. And once people really try out those sorts of things, it gets easier because you feel the difference. You can go and maintain those paces that you're looking for longer. You recover faster so you can do a second workout that day or just feel really fresh for the next day. So I think like the results are really they kind of speak for themselves, but I think to really look at that we have to think about what people really need, right? Like we can break down pre and post run fueling because that typically is like the hardest time I find for people, whether it's timing or appetite or whatever. Um, most people probably know like before a run, you need to really focus on carbohydrates. If you have time for a full meal, which is like 3 to 4 hours before you're heading out the door, have that full plate kind of thing we talked about. But in a lot of cases, it's waking up and trying to roll out of bed and get out there if you have things to do that day or whatever. And so in that case, I would say carbohydrates. If you're struggling with being able to sit down and have a bagel, for example, you mentioned juice. That's a huge benefit. Anything liquid that you can get your carbs from is going to be really beneficial, especially if you're not feeling up to that, and it has the added benefit of hydration too. And same with post run. We all know that we need protein after a run, and so doing something like milk or a protein shake or whatever is really useful a lot of times because it's portable, but also because it's much easier in a lot of cases to drink something if you're not feeling hungry than it is to try to sit down and eat like a full meal.
Hmm.
But I guess one thing I should mention about the protein piece afterwards is that most people know we need protein after we exercise, especially after runs. What we don't often talk about is that carbs are actually just as important as protein, and we actually need more carbs to refuel after a workout than we do protein. I think that's where a lot of people kind of it unintentionally are missing the mark there.
Yeah, because that's interesting. That was like my next question for you was that post training kind of thing. Like I'm sitting here now with a protein shake myself with a mix of creatine in it, and so uh, uh, I also want to ask you about the creatine, but what you were saying there about the carbs in addition to the protein, do we get enough carbs in like your typical protein shake, or should we add something to that protein shake after a workout to get all the benefits from that post workout fueling?
Yeah, so typically what I say is we need actually double the amount of carbs that we do protein after our workout. Ideally, a lot of times people are pushing closer to like 3 times the amount of carbs. So like if you're taking in a 20-gram protein shake, that means you really should be aiming for like 60 grams of carbs alongside of that. The vast majority of protein shakes are kind of they're marketed as like low carb or no sugar or things like that. Even if you make it with milk, that's like 12 grams of carbs that you're getting in in a glass of milk. So they make like, for products, they make like recovery shakes. A few different companies will have like recovery mixes that have the protein, but they also have a lot of carbs in there. So that's something that's a little bit easier. Chocolate milk is actually a great one. It's on you'd have to drink a decent amount of it to get that same amount of protein, but the sugar that they add to it for the flavoring is actually those carbs. It helps a lot. Um, but I also think it depends on like if you're having that protein shake to just get you through this hour and then you're going to have what is it?
Dinner. I'm
7:45
I'm
there.
having dinner now in a few minutes. So yeah.
Yeah, so in
Yeah.
that case, I think that just having the protein shake is fine, but you need to make sure if you just got back from a run before this, you're adding plenty of carbs with that
Yeah.
meal too.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then the creatine thing, because I'm curious about I feel like this has become, if I look at the last 2 years in the running community, people are really raving about the creatine. And personally, like I've started taking it, and I don't know anymore because there are so many things that I'm starting to include in my training. So it's really hard to know, is it the creatine? Is it the focus on nutrition after, before, during my workouts, or is it just that I'm better at easy runs? But I guess you have more experience with this, or at least you have more backed up thoughts on the creatine with running.
Yeah, so creatine is actually out of all the supplements, I'm pretty sure it's still like the most widely studied supplement. So it's one of the ones that I would say kind of across the board for athletes, whether you're in a strength and power sport or an endurance sport, it can be beneficial to add. And it's really been shown to be safe even for, like, kids, although kids, talk to your parents before you just add a creatine from Amazon. But yeah, so creatine can be really beneficial. We typically think about it as being beneficial for strength and power sports because it can give your muscles a little bit of extra energy to just go slightly farther, push a little 1 more rep or 2 more reps if you're lifting or things like that, but it has also been shown to be beneficial for endurance athletes too along those similar lines, like running is an endurance sport, but in a lot of ways you need power right behind your stride and you need it to carry you through. There's also been some research that has been really promising for like cognitive benefits of supplementing with creatine. So it's a pretty benign thing to add. One thing I would say to be careful of for all the athletes listening is you really want to make sure that it's from a reputable source.
Yeah.
So just buying the cheapest one off of Amazon, it might be an okay choice, but unless it's been what we call third party tested, where an independent lab actually looks at it tests it, make sure that nothing extra is in there that's not on the label, and everything the label says it has, it actually has. Make sure that you're A, getting your money's worth, but also B, not potentially ingesting something that for the pros out there or like the D1 college athletes, like could potentially get you a positive on a drug test inadvertently.
Mhm.
So anyways, yeah, making sure that it's tested and reputable is a really important step if you're going to take it.
Yeah, I'm very happy you mentioned that because I've heard stories of some some supplements of creatine where they didn't even have creatine in them and they were advertising it as it. So yeah,
Mhm,
that's good that you mentioned, and I'm also happy to hear that you have those same thoughts about creatine because I remember especially growing up when I was maybe 16, 17, that felt like something that only the gym bros would use, and it was kind of
mhm.
looked down upon from endurance athletes. It's like, that's like borderline, maybe not doping, but like you just looked at it in this in a very different way. So when I was introduced to it through running, I was like, oh, so this is actually different. I had to change my view on it. Um,
Mhm.
so I'm really happy that that is a product that we can use. But then you also have, and I know that this is a topic among runners, the fact that it binds water, right? Like, or it can do so that sometimes, if you, especially for those who are back to our conversation about wanting to lose weight or
Mhm.
things like that, you might actually hold on to water more because you're taking creatine. And then I'm curious about, like, how do we know that that's the creatine doing that? Are there any ways of figuring out that this is something happening to our body, and can we still use it in our marathon block and get rid of that water that is being held on to before race day, because then you might not want to have that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're opening up a whole can of worms here as it pertains to, like, water weight, because 'cause I'll get to that because I think it's a really interesting point. Um, what we know about creatine, we used to say, like, "Oh, it's just gonna cause you to store, like, an extra 5 pounds of water weight," or something like that. I don't know where they got that number from, but the typical dosing of creatine is anywhere between, like, 3 and 5 grams of creatine per day, depending on the individual. There used to be this protocol of, like, loading dose where you would take, like, 20 grams of creatine for a week or whatever, and then cut down to the 3 to 5 grams to, like, load your muscles up with it. Most, especially endurance athletes, we don't need to do that loading dose, and usually it's with those high doses, like 10, 20 plus grams of creatine a day. That's when you really have that, like, extra holding on to water weight. Um, the 3 to 5 grams, I have not really seen that have a significant
Hmm.
effect. And
Okay.
also, like, does it really matter if you're a couple pounds heavier, but you're getting the like,
Yeah.
your weight
No.
can actually fluctuate, you know, up to, like, a kilo or 2 or, like, 5 pounds in a day, depending on how much salt you ate the day before, when was the last time you went to the bathroom, like, all of these things can change our weight, and so, to your point, it's really hard to know if you that's why I usually suggest athletes don't rely too much on the scale or even at all to monitor body weight in a lot of cases because it is so up and down, and it can be really easy to try to attribute changes to something when we don't really know. Like, is it the
Mhm.
creatine? Is it because 'cause I'm eating enough carbs, which is the can of worms that you opened up? Because, carbohydrates, I think a lot of people know are stored in our muscles, and that's part of why it's really important to eat enough carbs in the diet, especially for runners, because that's the fuel that we're actually using in a long endurance race. But every gram of carbohydrate is stored with multiple grams of water. And so the more adequate carbohydrates you're getting in your diet, the heavier in theory, you're gonna be. Not
Mhm.
because the carbs caused you to gain weight, but it's just because your muscles have more water in them. And in a lot of cases, that can be super beneficial from a hydration perspective. If you're 2 hours into a race, and it's getting harder to drink, it can help. And then
Yeah.
there's the topic of carb loading, which can be a really helpful thing too, but I think a lot of people, when they're adequately carb loaded, their muscles are stocked up with this glycogen or these stored carbohydrates that are going to help them after 90 minutes plus of running. But it can lead people to feel kind of bloated, heavy. And when you combine that with a taper where everyone's feeling like crap in a lot of
Hmm.
cases, it's not an ideal feeling, but it really has been shown to be helpful.
Yeah. Thanks for that. That's something that I'm at least gonna take with me. And when you're talking about carb loading, if you're up for it, I would love for us to do another episode at some point, for like when we get closer to Boston, just to have like, because I know that you made a post on that, and I would love to hear
Yes.
more about that. We're getting closer to the conversation. I told you an hour-ish, and now we're a bit over that already, but. Uh, I find these things so interesting, and now we've talked a lot about you know fueling and nutrition for like for our daily life, and that was kind of the purpose of this conversation. So I'm not going to ask you about like fueling during a workout or during runs, but I am curious about the rest day, because to some of us, or to a lot of people, I know that it might be harder to know what to do on a rest day. And if you are an athlete, you might have more time on a rest day, and then you're bored and you eat because you're bored. And then some people are saying, well, the rest day is the day that you should fuel up, and some people are saying that rest day is the day that you don't have to eat as much, because that's your chance if you want to lose weight. Back to that again, that's your chance to kind of like not eat as much. And how should we approach the rest day? And when I'm saying rest day, again, back to what you were saying, then I'm talking about the day where you're not running, not just a short 10-mile run.
An easy 10-mile run, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yes, that's a great question, and it's gonna come back to it depends, it's very individual based on the person, but I would say someone who's in the middle of a marathon training block, rest days should not be significantly less food than your long run the day before or whatever you have the day before. Um, the reason for that is because we tend to do things in 24-hour cycles, like, that's just how our brains like to think about it. Our bodies don't just reset after 24 hours, right? Like, it's not like, "Oh, you did your long run yesterday. Today, it's as if that never happened and your body's resting, so that means that's only what you need." Um, and so I typically think about the change in nutrition is usually if you can have a little bit more room to eat more fruits and vegetables on a rest day, that's an excellent time to really get those in if it's harder to do that on busy, high volume training days. But the other thing is the changes you're probably not fueling before a run because you're not running. You're not having that snack after a run because you're not running, and you're not fueling during where you might, hopefully, if you're going on a certain duration of run depending on the person. And so, like, that's the biggest change that I tend to recommend for people is, like, don't then cut back on, skip breakfast or eat just a salad and chicken and no carbs with your lunch. That's your body still needs that because you are still recovering for that
Hmm.
24 to 36 hours. The change is really you're not adding all that extra stuff on top of it that you hopefully are doing to fuel your training on the other days.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. That's also helpful. I feel like we're approaching the rest day very differently sometimes. So
Why? What
it's
is your experience of
no,
it?
no, more that like when you hear about it, feels sometimes like, oh, I'm not running, I don't need as much, the all those thoughts. And also based on what you're saying, it's true to some degree, right? Like you don't need to have that pre-run snack or post workout protein shake, whatever. And so that makes it different. I think my issue is not that I'm eating less on a rest day. I will be bored, or I will have more time to eat, so I might end up eating more sometimes. So I'm definitely not one of those who are just like, oh, I don't need food today. I'm more like I could easily eat more. But no, I just, when I said it was more that I think that a lot of people are approaching it in such different ways. So
Yeah.
it's very interesting to hear what you're saying, and also to bring that with us and especially having that like 24-hour cycle of just like don't change things too much. And there are some changes that will naturally come with a different type of day, but still like not change it too much.
Yeah, and, you're also in the middle of a big training block and you've got big goals coming up, like, I'm sure your volume is climbing up there, and
Yeah.
so to me, it would actually make sense if you're feeling super hungry on rest days, and I'm a big fan like you said, you can also really tune in with how you're feeling and be realistic with yourself. Am I just bored or stressed or whatever,
Hmm.
and I'm literally just doing this for entertainment? Yeah, maybe then it's a case where you don't wanna overdo it too much, but in a lot of cases, I think if you really tune in, you might recognize, like, "Well, yeah, I didn't eat, a snack before bed the night before, and I woke up super hungry today." Or
Hmm.
maybe you just need that time to catch up, on a rest day, and so I really encourage people to listen to that feeling, and things might get a little bit more even keeled when you kind of relax about it and just let yourself you're not gonna be totally out of control and never
Hmm.
stop eating again if you try to, you know, just listen to how you're feeling.
Yeah. No, I love that. And then the last question I have for you on or for this episode is, I saw that you also made a post about it, and the trend today I feel like is people are drinking less alcohol, but a lot of people, and myself included, like there are days or times when you want to be social, and like having that drink in your hand might make you feel like it's more fun, not because you're getting drunk or anything like that, but it's just like you want to have a beer or two or a glass of wine
Mhm.
or two. And I think that most of us, especially people listening to this, trying to get advice, they know that alcohol is not gonna make them perform better. But if we were to like pick one day to do that, like if you look at a normal training week for a lot of people, they will have maybe two workouts, like or one workout in a long run, and
Mhm.
maybe they have one rest day a week, one rest day every other week, um, and then fill in with easy runs. Uh, I'm not asking you to recommend to drink alcohol, but it's more like if you are to actually have a drink or two, what day is the best or least worst, however you wanna look at it, to actually do that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think to answer, we have to look at what alcohol does to us, right? Like, we're kind of trying to mitigate the negative effects that it might have, and so I'm definitely not like a, "No one should drink alcohol if you wanna perform," like, it can be part of a perfectly fine performance, lifestyle, but um, the 2 things that I think about with alcohol is sleep, its impacts on sleep, which are always negative. I think a lot of people might notice that, like, "Oh, I fall asleep." Sometimes, unfortunately, people drink alcohol and they notice they fall asleep easier, and so they might use that as a way to fall asleep. But what the research shows us is that that sleep is way less high quality than it would be without the alcohol once you're asleep. So it has negative effects on sleep, and it definitely has negative effects on hydration, either from the fact that alcohol just does dehydrate you, but also because if you're drinking alcohol, you might not be hydrating with the water or other things that
Hmm.
you would
Yeah.
typically be having. And so, like, what day of the week would be okay for you to potentially just take it a little easier and deal with those effects? I would probably say not before a workout day and not before your long run. So but also I would say maybe don't do it after the long run because it takes a while to recoup that hydration. So as long as you're able to fit in your meals, drink enough that you know you need, and maybe we could talk later about how to know how much you need to hydrate, but, like, if you can do all of that and have a couple of drinks, fine. But I
Hmm.
wouldn't maybe go out to the bar till late that I mean, everyone knows this. You wouldn't do that the night before a long run if you wanna
No.
feel good or the night before a
Hmm.
workout. So I guess if you had to pick maybe a rest day where you can then, like, super focus on, like, staying up to date with hydration and eating
Yeah.
appropriately too.
Yeah. I think that's a good answer, and I think that most people understand that it's not ideal. It's not like one day is that much better than the other, but it's still interesting. And I like my experience at least has been I don't drink that much, but when I do, I will have like a beer or uh, and if I stop drinking beers at like 8 or 9 p.m., like that's pretty early, but like especially like over Christmas, for instance, if we had a few beers from say 5 6 p.m. to 8 9 p.m., I realized that okay, my sleep was actually much better. But as long as like, and then that is obviously based on how much I drink and also when I stop and when I go to bed, because then I'm always looking at my resting heart rate and I can tell when that is higher. That is usually when my sleep has been worse, and I'm also wearing the Aura ring, so it kind of gives me feedback.
Yep.
But just ending the drinking a bit earlier has also helped a lot. But I guess that also means that I'm almost like maybe I am sober when I go to bed, right? So it doesn't affect me as much. But
Mhm.
I'm definitely not encouraging anyone to do it at all. Like I didn't drink. I had my first drink when I was 23 years old because I really did not want to uh, have any bad effects on my training back when I
Yeah.
was a skater. So
Good
I'm
for
definitely
you.
pro the no alcohol when you're training. And sometimes I'm like, why did I even start when I was, 23? Because then you've gone through the hardest part of peer pressure and all of that.
Yeah, true. Well, I also think too, like, in our age, I'm 31, so we're similar in age, and, like, I think a lot of I don't know how it is in Norway, but I know in the US, like, a lot of social events revolve around alcohol still
Yeah.
at this age, like, going to the beach, people bring drinks, and
Hmm.
what you do is you go out to eat with your friends and you have drinks, and, like, that's all fine, and I think, you know, to your point about, like, all of this, to bring it back to, body composition and weight goals, like, I would actually focus on something like that. Like, let's take out those extra beers that you're
Yeah.
having in a week rather than I'm gonna skip this snack or
Yes.
avoid
Yeah.
sugar,
Yeah.
that's a
Because
way to look at it.
no, but that's been a big realization for me as well, especially like in the summers, for instance, when you have more of it and you just cut that out and you see, oh, I'm back to where I was like a couple of weeks later, just because you cut that out and you kind of forget how much that actually affects you. So no,
Yeah, so do
it's
your
uh,
carb load, do your creatine or whatever, and maybe the thing that's not providing you any benefit might be
yeah,
the one to focus on.
exactly. Now, Casey, thank you so much for everything that you shared. I feel like we've just covered the surface here, and I will link all your information down below because I feel like you've now given us the guidelines here, but I also feel like for the more specifics, it's definitely uh, more that I think that you can provide us with. And I really hope that at some point, we've been talking about working together. I hope that we can do that at some point. And so, yeah, I just want to thank you for coming on today, and hopefully we can talk more about fueling and carb loading when we get closer to Boston.
Totally, I would love that. Yeah, I feel like all the fun things are like the little, details that you can kind of put into place and really specific planning for your race and things like that. So I always love talking about that. And I'll probably see you in Boston because I am gonna be up there spectating at least. So I'm excited for that.
Awesome. Can't wait to meet in person. Okay.
Thanks
Thank you
so
so
much for
much for
having
coming on.
me.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I feel like this was a great episode for so many reasons. One of them being that it's just so much information that is easy to adapt to our everyday life. So for me, I feel like even today, I talked to Casey yesterday. Even today, it was easier for me to prepare my lunch and be more aware of these things. And one of the biggest takeaways, I think, is that carbs is not necessarily carbs. So like sweet potatoes might be good, very good for you, but then it might not have enough of the vitamins that we need. And so just being aware of the kind of carbs that we're eating and making sure that we have a variety also in terms of carbs, that was very interesting. I'm really excited to talk to Casey again a bit later, closer to the Boston Marathon, about fueling during the races or on race day and also carb loading. But for now, that was it. Thank you so much for listening to the Marathon Podcast. I really appreciate you being here. And look out for the next episode. We're having Victor Smengs on, and I can't wait for you guys to hear that one. You listen to the Marathon Podcast, brought to you by Wild Studio.